two parables that I encountered in my various reading that I've adapted, expanded, joined together, and done other things with. I'd like to give a special thanks to Kierkegaard and Peter Rollins. Exactly. All right. This first one is called No Conviction. The USSR was once a totalitarian nation where following Christ was a subversive and illegal activity. We were part of a very small, rural, underground, Christian intentional community. One day, our village was accused of criminal activity. The men from each house were arrested and brought before the court. We had been under secret scrutiny for some time now, and so the prosecution was able to build up quite a strong case. They began the trial by offering the judge dozens of photographs that show us attending church meetings, organizing religious events, and participating in various prayer and worship services. After this, they presented a selection of items confiscated from our houses: religious books, hymnals, icons of Christ. And then they stepped up the pace by displaying many of the poems, hymns, and letters that we had lovingly written concerning our faith. Finally, in closing, the prosecution offered our Bibles to the judge. These were well-worn books with scribbles, notes, and drawings, and underlinings throughout. Evidence that we had read and reread the scriptures many times. Throughout the case, we sat silently in fear and trembling. Deep in our hearts, we knew that with the large body of evidence that had been amassed by the prosecution, our community faced the possibility of a long imprisonment or even execution. At various times throughout the proceedings, we felt like we had lost all confidence. At many times, we were on the verge of standing up and denying Christ. But while this thought plagued our minds, we resisted the temptation and remained faithful to Christ. Once the prosecution finished presenting their case, the judge asked if we had anything to add, but we remained silent and resolute, terrified that if we opened our mouths for even a moment, we might deny Christ to escape these overwhelming charges. Like Christ, we remained silent before our accusers. We were then led outside to wait as the judge pondered the case. Hours passed slowly as we sat under guard in the foyer, waiting to be summoned back. Eventually, a young man in uniform appeared and led us into the courtroom to hear a verdict and receive our punishment. Once we were seated in the dock, the judge, a harsh and unyielding man, entered the stand. He looked at us warmly and said, "Of the charges that have been brought forward, I find the accused not guilty." Our hearts froze, and then, in a breath of fear and terror, we swallowed up our confusion and rage and stood defiantly before the judge and demanded that he give an explanation for why we were innocent of the charges in the light of the overwhelming evidence. "What evidence?" he replied, looking shocked. "The poems and songs we wrote and sang," he replied. "They simply show that you think yourselves to be poets, nothing more. But what if our fasting, our services in the church, our sleepless nights of prayer, evidence that you are good speakers and actors and nothing more, replied the judge. For surely you have deluded the state investigators and informers. Perhaps at times you even deluded yourselves. But this foolishness is not enough to convict you in a court of law. We all shouted hysterically at the judge. Is there no evidence that will convince you? Of course there is, the judge replied, baffled. Evidence you have failed to produce. He sighed and added, the state is indifferent towards your Bible reading and church attendance. It has no concern for your worship in ornate words and gaudy charades. You may freely thrive as a church and continue to paint pictures of love and devotion. For we have no interest in frivolous artists who spend their time creating images and fantasies of a better world. He smiled and continued, we exist only to crack down on those who would drop their brush and even their lives in a Christ-like endeavor to create a better world. So until you live as Christ did, until you challenge this system, until you are a thorn in our side, until you die to yourself and readily offer your body to the flames, until then, my friends, you are no enemy of ours.